Hi guys, Karen Duncan here. In today's video, I'd like to demonstrate the way that the if function is used in Microsoft Excel. Now, you can think of the if function as a decision maker. Primarily, what it does is, if one condition is met or is true, it performs one action. Whereas, if that condition is not met, then it can perform an alternative action. So in this video, let's take a look at 4 examples ranging from basic all the way to advanced in relation to how the if function is used in Microsoft Excel. So in today's example, we're taking a look at a company that manufactures a special type of light. Now what we have here is a list of all of the employees. We have the quantity of units that each of these employees assemble. And if you take a look in the middle here, what we have here is some information that relates to the pay rate system of this company. So if an employee assembled 100 units or less, then in that case, they receive a standard rate of this amount. Now, if they performed a bit better and they've assembled over 100 units, then for each unit in excess of 100 units, they receive a bonus rate of this amount up to a ceiling of 125 units. Now, if they've done exceptionally well and they've produced or they've assembled over 125 units, then for each unit in excess of 125 units, they receive a bonus rate of this amount. So the first thing that I'd like to do is distinguish which employees on my list are entitled to a bonus. Now, the condition that these employees have to meet in order to be entitled to a bonus is that they must have assembled over 100 units. So let's use the if function to answer that question for us. So we're going to type the if function, and the first argument it asks us for is the logical test. Now, the logical test is where we set the condition that has to be met in order for the if function to perform some action. So in this case, our logical test is that the quantities produced or assembled has to be over 100 units. Next, it asks me value if true. In other words, if this condition is met, then what should the if function do? Well, what I'd like the if function to do is simply return me the answer yes if this condition is met. Now, if I want my answer to be in the form of a text string, then I need to put it within quotation marks. So that's what I'm going to do. Next, it asks me value if false. In other words, if this condition is not met, then what should the if function do in this case? Well, in this case, we want to return the answer no. Close our bracket, we click enter. And if we forward this function downwards, here we're able to distinguish the employees on our list that are entitled to a bonus and the ones that aren't. Now, another example of the way that the if function can be used is to determine the way a calculation should be performed based on a condition. So I want to apply that to our total P. Now, as we mentioned at the outset, our employees basically fall into 2 different categories. There are those entitled to a bonus, and there are those that are not. So if an employee is entitled to a bonus, I want the if function to calculate their standard rate of salary plus their bonus rate. And if they're just entitled to the standard rate, then I want the if function to just provide me with that answer. So let's construct an if function that does just that. For my logical test, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this item. I'm going to type if this is equal to yes. In other words, my condition here is basically saying if this employee is entitled to a bonus, then do this. So what I want the if function to do here is calculate the first 100 units by the standard rate, and then I want it to add the bonus. Remember, these are employees that are entitled to a bonus. Whereas if an employee is not entitled to a bonus, meaning they assembled 100 or less units, then I simply want the if function to multiply their quantity of units assembled by the standard rate. Enter. And if we forward that downwards, so here we get the total pay for our employees based on whether they're entitled to a bonus or not. So our condition was whether they were entitled to a bonus. In our next example, let's take a look at nesting if functions. Now, a nested if function is where we combine at least two if functions. This becomes necessary when we want to perform different actions for different conditions. This could be applied to calculating bonuses for these employees, because these employees are paid a specific bonus based on two different conditions. The first condition is, as we mentioned at the outset, if an employee has assembled over 100 units, up to 125 units or less, then that employee receives the first bonus rate for each unit in excess of 100 units with a ceiling of 125 units. Whereas, if an employee has assembled over 125 units, well, they're going to receive the first 25 units over 100 units at the first bonus rate, whereas they'd receive any units in excess of 125 units at the second bonus rate. So those are two different conditions which requires two different calculations. So if we wanted to use the if function to calculate either of these scenarios based on the category that the employee falls into, we'd have to use a nested if function. Let's apply this. So let's place our first if function in order to set our first condition. Now, what's our first condition going to be? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if this is more than 125. In other words, if an employee has assembled over 125 units, that's my condition, then I want to take some specific action. In this case, what I want to do is I want to calculate the first 25 units over 100 units at the first bonus rate. And then I want to add any units over 125 units multiplied at the second bonus rate. And in order to do that, what I could simply do is take this value here and deduct it from 125, and that'll give me the excess units, and I could multiply that at the bonus rate, the second bonus rate that is. And so we basically defined our first condition, and we've defined the action that we want to take if that condition is met. Next pops up value if false. In other words, what do we do if this condition is not met? Well, in this case, we want to apply another if function in order to perform, or in order to search for another condition and apply a different action if that condition is met. So in this case, I'm going to say if this amount is more than 100. So these are employees who've assembled over 100, but not more than 125. And in this case, what I simply want to do is multiply any amounts over 100 by the first bonus rate. And in order to do that, I could simply take this amount and less 100. And that'll give me the excess units above 100 units, but not above 125 units. Now what we want to do here for value if false, in other words, if neither of these conditions are met, what we're going to do is we're going to place 2 quotation marks. And basically what we're signifying to the if function is to do nothing if neither of these conditions are met. Now let's place 2 brackets to close off our nested if functions. Enter. And if we apply this all the way down, here we see that the nested if functions have basically checked to see whether our employees meet either of these conditions, and it's applied a specific calculation based on which of those conditions they've met. For those employees that didn't meet either of these conditions, it did nothing. So one point that I think is worth mentioning here is, keep in mind we can nest multiple if functions. However, as soon as the if function identifies a condition that is true, it's going to stop searching further for more conditions. And that's why I didn't include as the first condition employees that assembled 100 units or more. Because in that case, the if function would have identified those employees who assembled over 125 units as well as meeting that condition, and it would have only applied the first bonus rate to their bonuses. So by placing the conditions in this order, we get the if function to look at both conditions and apply them respectively based on which condition the employees meet. Another way in which the if function could be used, which I think is pretty cool, is to determine whether or not another function should be used based on a condition. So as an example, let's say we wanted to identify the supervisors that were in charge of those employees that assembled over 125 units. Because obviously those employees did exceptional in comparison to the other employees, and perhaps we'd like to reward the supervisors that were in charge of them. So in this case, what I'd like to do is use a VLOOKUP function to search inside of this table, which includes my employees and their respective supervisors, find the supervisor if those employees have assembled over 125 units. So let's apply that. So my condition is going to be if the units assembled is over 125. And in this case, my value if true is going to be a VLOOKUP function. So I'm nesting a VLOOKUP function within the if function. So my lookup value is going to be the employee. My table array is going to be my table here, which includes both the employees and the supervisors. And I want to lock this reference, of course. I'm searching in the second column and I'm looking for an exact match, so I type false. Now, if an employee doesn't meet this condition, then I don't want to identify the supervisor. So for my value if false, I'm going to include 2 quotation marks so that the if function does nothing in this case. And if we bring this all the way down, here we see that the supervisors have been identified. So we can use the if function to determine whether or not other functions should be used based on a condition. Pretty cool stuff, I'd say. So if you appreciated the value of what I shared today, then you can express your gratitude by liking this video And let me know in the comments what you think of the if function. Also, if there are any topics that you'd like me to cover in a next video, then also leave that in the comments below as well. If you'd want to continue getting content like this, then you can subscribe to the channel. And lastly, I want to thank you again for watching, and bye.